Hello and welcome back to the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory. My name is Dr. Roger K. Green, and this is a contextualized reading for Book 21 of Homer's Odyssey for an ongoing course titled Homer and the Critique of Western Civilization. Now, the book opens with Athena inspiring Penelope, and as we know from previous books in the epic, Penelope has decided to have a archery contest to decide which one of the suitors will marry her. She will marry. So Athena is inspired now to go and get the bow out of its storage in a secret room. And as we get the description of her getting the bow, we get a tale of how Odysseus got the bow to begin with. And so we're told that there was a raid on Ithaca when Odysseus was a young man. Messenian raiders had lifted flocks from Ithaca, 300 head, in their oar-swept ships. The herdsmen too. So his father and island elders sent Odysseus off, a young boy, on a mission, a distant embassy to made to right that wrong. Iphitus, who is the person who gives Odysseus eventually the bow, went there hunting the stock that he had lost, a dozen mares still nursing their hardy suckling mules, the same mares that would prove his certain death when he reached the son of Zeus, that iron heart, Heracles, the past master of monstrous works, who killed the man, a guest in his own house. Brutal, not a care for the wrathful eyes of God or rites of hospitality he had spread before him. No, he dined him, then he murdered him, commandeered those hard-hoofed mares for the hero's own grange. Still on the trail of these, when he met Odysseus, Iphitus gave him the bow his father, mighty Eurytus, used to wield as a young man. But when he died, in his lofty house he left to his son. In turn, Odysseus gave his friend a sharp sword and a rugged spear, to mark the start of a friendship, treasured ties that bind. But before they got to know the warmth of each other's board, the son of Zeus had murdered Eurytus's magnificent son, who gave the prince the bow. So there's a lot of different intertextuality going on here as well. One thing that's interesting, I think, to note from here is that Heracles, the hero and son of Zeus, appears to be living at least an overlap for part of his life during the same lifetime as Odysseus. Now we know that Heracles is dead because Odysseus has met him in the underworld earlier in the epic. So something is going on in the intertextuality and in the setup of the structure of the text by Homer here to invoke this story, I think, and the parallel. So we will see later on that there's that Odysseus becomes an archer, and that Telemachus will take up the spear and the sword too. So there might be some parallels going on there. What's interesting, I think, also is that Heracles, as a son of Zeus, we know is in the underworld. He is not in the Elysian fields. We're told that Menelaus is going to the Elysian fields because he's married to Helen, but we also know that his brother Agamemnon, who was married to Helen's sister Clytemnestra, is not in the Elysian fields. They're in the underworld. So there's a lot of this doubling and paralleling going on. And Heracles breaks the Xenia, the law of Zeus, but he's also the son of Zeus. At the same time, we have another son of Zeus showing up in this chapter, and that is Apollo, who has not made much of an appearance throughout the text at all, but Apollo being a son of Zeus, but also being a god of both archery and of wine. And I think the wine will show up importantly in what follows as well. So we get the story of the bow, and there's this magical weapon. The magical weapon is a theme that shows up throughout mythology. I'm not going to do a lot of commentary on that here, but definitely scholars such as David Leeming have written about the magical object, the enchanted object. The enchanted object also shows up in folklore and folk tales as well. So we get this intense description of the weapon, but the weapon seems to be charged with other meanings of alliances, of disputes, and of relationships to gods. So the queen reaches the hidden vault and stopped short of the oaken door sill. Work an expert sanded smooth and trued to the line some years ago, planting the door jambs snugly, hanging shining doors. At once she loosed the thong from around its hook, inserted the key, and aiming straight and true, shot back the bolts, and rasping doors groaned as loudly as a bull will bellow, chomping grass at pasture. So as the key went home, those handsome double doors rang out now and sprang wide before her. This is just such an interesting, loaded imagery here. So first of all, we get this kind of, she's going to this magnificently crafted thing. But we also get this language of straight and true that connotes archery, right? That connotes doing, seeing something all the way through. The bolts open, and the rasping doors groaned as loud as a bull will bellow, chomping grass at pasture. So as the key went home, those handsome double doors rang out now and sprang wide before her. So the bull, which of course we know the bulls are being sacrificed throughout this kind of text, and the image of her opening up these doors. So she takes that and she goes, she finds the suitors and she gives her ultimatum. She says, all right, so to arms, my gallants, here's the prize at issue right before you. Look, I set before you the great bow of Odysseus now. The hand that can string this bow with greatest ease, that shoots an arrow clean through all 12 axes, he is the man I follow. Yes, forsaking this house where I was once a bride, this gracious house so filled with the best of that life can offer. And so she turns to Eumaeus, the swineherd, and orders that he go set the bow and the gleaming iron axes out before the suitors. And then the cowherd shows up here as well. And Antinous shows up and rebukes them. And Antinous, whose name appears to mean something like anti-being. I think I've mentioned that in other. If ousia is being, right, is the to be verb, right, in Greek, and antinousia. And Antinous says, yokels, fools, you can't tell night from day, you mawkish idiots. Why are you sniveling here? You're stirring up your mistress. Isn't she drowned in grief enough already? So they're grieving having to set this up, right? She already lost her darling husband. And so he's standing up, he's acting kind of macho here. No easy game, and he then praises Odysseus. Not a soul in the crowd can match Odysseus. What a man he was. And Homer tells us smooth talk, but in the suitor's heart his hopes were bent on stringing the bow and shooting through the axes. Antinous fated to be the first man to taste an arrow whipped from great Odysseus's hands. The king he mocked at ease in the king's house, egging comrades on to mock him too. And that's the theme, of course, even subtly there, mocking the king even as he praises the king in the king's own house. This is the ultimate kind of lack of hospitality or lack of graciousness for being hosted by someone. Now Telemachus jumps in here, and he, of course, he's all in on Odysseus's plan here. And he says, amazing, Zeus up there has robbed me of my wits. My own dear mother, sensible as she is, she says she'll marry again, forsake our house. Look at me, laughing for all I'm worth, giggling like some fool. Step up, my friends. Here's the prize at issue, right before you. Look, a woman who has no equal now in all Achaean country, neither holy Pylos nor Argos or Mycenae, not even Ithaca itself, or in the loamy mainland. You know it well. Why sing my mother's praises? Come, let the games begin. No dodges, no delays. And then I take a crack at the bow myself, if it would help. And everybody's sort of laughing at Telemachus here, who steps down. He says, with that he leapt to his feet and dropped his bright red cloak, slipping the sword and sword belt off his shoulders. First he planted the axes, digging a long trench, one for all, and trewed them all to line, then tamped the earth to bed them. Wonder took the revelers looking on, his work so firm, precise, though he'd never seen the axes ranged before. He stood at the threshold, poised to try the bow. 3 times he tried to shudder. So he's trying to, he's saying, well, if I could string this, maybe I could just save everything and just keep my house for myself. But of course it doesn't work. He says, God help me, must I be a weakling, a failure all my life? And of course he's playing the fool a bit here. Unless I'm just too young to trust my hands to fight off any man who rises up against me. Come, my betters, so much stronger than I am, try the bow and finish the contest. And so the suitors begin to unsuccessfully, of course, string the bow. The first being Laodes, Oenopsis' son, a seer who could see their futures in the smoke, who always sat beside the glowing wine bowl, well back, the one man in the group who loathed their reckless ways and appalled their outrage. His turn first, and he can't do it. And he says we should give up. But Antinous comes back and berates him, and then calls on the suitors to go and temper or heat up oil and the bow, and to lube up the bow to make it more limber, and perhaps that will make things easier. Now, of course, Antinous isn't trying to string the bow himself. He's waiting to test other people, and he's hoping that the bow is going to get easier in doing so. As this is happening, then the swineherd Eumaeus and the cowherd go out, kind of sneak off, and Odysseus notices them and he follows them outside, right? And at this point he probes them and he asks them what they would do if Odysseus were to show up right now. Would they be loyal to him? And of course they say that they would, and they Eumaeus has already, for himself anyway, quite proven his loyalty. And so certain at least these two were loyal to the death. Odysseus reassured them quickly, and he says, I'm right here. And he reveals his identity to them. And he says, if you help me defeat the suitors, if you do what I say, these are the things I'm going to offer you. And so we want to notice especially just that Odysseus has the power to offer this kind of a gift to these servant people of his. I'll tell you what's in store for you. If a god beats down the lofty suitors at my hands, I'll find you wives, both of you, grant you property, sturdy houses beside my own, and in my eyes you'll be the comrades to Prince Telemachus, brothers from then on. Come, I'll show you something, living proof, know me for certain. put your minds at ease. And so this starts, if we're thinking about the kind of the broad history of Western civilization here, right, for at least this reading in this course of these contextualized readings, want to notice that what soldiers are paid for here is land, is this notion of property. That notion of property is old, but perhaps emergent for the time being, or for the time period. So we're talking about, like 7th century, 6th, 7th century before current era here, at least in Greece. But that notion of property is showing up, and the notion that the property or the land is the reward that one gets for helping one's king, one's liege. And that it can be a moving up in status as well. So the two servants are being offered to be on some sort of par, or as brethren to Odysseus's own son. And then he shows them proof, right? He shows them the scar, and the scar will show up again and again as proof. And they're amazed by this, of course. And then he says, this is what we're going to do. When Telemachus and I go back in, you're going to get the women, and you're going to move them and to tell them to bolt all of their doors and not to open and to come out, no matter, even if they hear scuffling and screaming. If anyone hears from there the jolting blows and groans of men caught in our huge net, not one of them show her face. And then we get the name of the cowherd. I've been calling him the cowherd, but the name actually shows up here. Philoetius, right? Here are your orders. Shoot the bolt of the courtyard's outer gate, lock it, and hold it fast. So we want to keep anybody from outside who might hear the screams from coming in, to save the suitors as well. And then we get a shift back to the suitors. So just now Eurymachus held the bow in his hands, turning it over tip to tip before the blazing fire to heat the weapon, but he failed to bend it even so, and the suitor's high heart groaned to bursting. A black day, a blow to myself, a blow to each man here. It's less the marriage that mortifies me now, that's galling too, but lots of women are left, some in seagirt Ithaca, some in other cities. What breaks my heart is the fact that we fall so short of great Odysseus' strength. We cannot string his bow, a disgrace to ring in the ears of men to come. So again, even the suitors are still continuing to praise Odysseus, to put him up on high. And then we get the mention of that today is Apollo's feast day. And we know, and so of course Antinous is breaking in to rebuke Eurymachus and say that there's no way that by the end of the day somebody's not going to have strung this bow, because it is Apollo's feast day. So the gods must be involved in this in some way anyway. So quit acting so stupid, Eurymachus, is again to quit overblowing these things. Will offer will invoke through libations, through the pouring of wine, a prayer to Apollo, and then in the first thing in the morning, says Antinous will send Melanthius, the goat herd, to go pick goats, and will sacrifice goats to Apollo, god of the archers. And so the advice of Antinous is welcomed, and they all agree. And then Odysseus, trickster that he is, comes up. He's of course in disguise as an old man, and he asks Antinous and Eurymachus for a humble attempt to try stringing the bow. And this, of course, sets them into a rage. And it should tell us a little bit about class relations. So we know that as in disguise as an old man, Odysseus has already won his place, being the only beggar that is going to be able to eat with the suitors, right, from then on. So that was already covered. But even though he's won one contest, he does not get to be on the same level as the suitors. And so just the gall that he would have to think that he could try something like this is offensive to them. And Antinous rebukes him, and he invokes, interestingly here, a diatribe on wine and centaurs. Now we know that Apollo is going to be associated with wine, but he's particularly going to be associated with wine and rationality, and not Bacchus, that's the Roman term, but Dionysus, the wine god, who will show up later on, just like one brief mention in the Odyssey, but he has not shown up here. He's a later god that comes in. So wine is about balance here in the way that's being invoked, but it's, in the shadow of the fact that this is Apollo's feast day. No one else can eavesdrop on our talk, no tramp, no beggar. The wine has overpowered you, heady wine, the ruin of many another man, whoever gulps it down and drinks beyond his limit. Wine, it drove the centaur, famous Eurytion, mad in the halls of lion-hearted Pirithous. There he visited the Lapiths, crazed with wine, the headlong centaur bent to his ugly work in the prince's own house. His host sprang up, seized with fury, dragged him across the forecourt, flung him out of doors, hacking off his nose off and his ears off with their knives. No mercy. The creature reeled away, still blind with drink, his heart like a wild storm, loaded with all the frenzy in his mind. And so the feud between mortal men and centaurs had its start. But the drunk was first to bring disaster on himself by drowning in his cups. You too, I promise you, no end of trouble if you should string that bow. And so this is a threat, but it's invoked this whole other story, this whole moment of intertextuality with this other race. So I've talked about this through various different contextualized readings, that if we think about race from a critical race theory perspective that says that it exists, that racism exists throughout time and history, but we don't necessarily have, that doesn't mean it can't change the way that it looks, right? So this is about power relations between people. So that skin color based racism that we're all so familiar with in the current day and age was not the way that race was necessarily determined in the ancient world. And so when we look at different races, the gods appear to be a different race. But maybe even among the immortals, there are different kinds of races. The naiads, the nymphs, for example, the giants from the Gigantomachy. And here the centaur shows up. But we also know historically, this is one of the interesting intersections of just doing mythological study, we know that there were actual people associated with the centaurs who are horse riders from Thessaly. And so there were these invading, quote, barbarians, quote, savages, and that they rode horses, and that image of the man on horseback kind of finds its way into the idea of the monster, the centaur. And so, but the centaurs are also given a kind of immortal or godlike status. So there's that kind of blending, there's that kind of ambiguity. And I want to make sure to think of that, because I think that, people like Nietzsche have invoked this. He's certainly not the only one who invoked the idea that in the ancient world, that perhaps the gods and the different genealogies, the different pantheons suggest reigns of noble people in power that then become deified and immortalized over time through memory. And so here is a case of that where that seems to have happened in the text itself. A feud between mortal men and centaurs. Also, just one other instance to note there is, here's again the theme of Xenia showing up. What the centaur did was he got drunk, disrespected the host, and goes out and has his ears and nose cut off. That again is going to parallel this, Xenia gone wrong with Heracles that was already invoked earlier in this book. Then we get a shift where Penelope steps in on behalf of the old man, who is, of course, Odysseus in disguise. Antinous, watchful Penelope, stepped in. How impolite it would be, how wrong to scant whatever guest Telemachus welcomes to his house. You really think if the stranger trusts so to his hands and strength that he strings Odysseus's great bow, he'll take me home and claim me as his bride? He never dreamed such a thing, I'm sure. So she's kind of stepping in. She's being sly. She's saving him. She's met him already as well, so we know she has some kindness for him. Don't let that ruin the feast for any reveler here. Unthinkable. Nothing could be worse. And then smooth-talking Eurymachus jumps in too, like always quick to play the kiss ass after Penelope has spoken. Wise Penelope, daughter of Icarius, do we really expect the man to wed you? Unthinkable, I know, but we do recoil at the talk of men and women. One of the island's meaner sort will mutter, look at the riffraff courting the king's wife. Weaklings, look, they can't even string his bow. But along came this beggar, drifting out of the blue, strung his bow with ease, and shot through with all of the axes. Gossip will fly, we'll hang our heads in shame. Now, all of this is completely neglecting Xenia. Like, it's flying in the face of Xenia, because we already know that any beggar could be. The reason why you want to be respectful of the strangers that they might be a god in disguise. And so in denying the old man even the chance, they're showing a kind of fear and a rejection of the possibility that there will be immortal presence here. And Penelope jumps right back here. Shame, alert, Penelope protested. How can you hope for any public fame at all? You who disgrace, devour a great man's house and home. Why hang your heads in shame over next to nothing? Our friend here is a strapping, well-built man and claims to be the son of a noble father. Come, hand him the bow now. Let's just see. I tell you this, and I'll make good on my word. If he strings the bow and Apollo grants him glory, I'll dress him in a shirt and cloak and handsome clothes. I'll give him a good sharp lance to fight off men and dogs, give him a two-edged sword and sandals for his feet, and send him off wherever his heart desires. Notice as well, so there's this back and forth going on between Eurymachus, Antinous, and Penelope. Everybody's playing some sort of a game here. There are clear class rules that show up. Even though Penelope has stepped in on behalf of the old man, she says there's no way he would try to marry me. She's giving the old man an out there, right? There's also no way that she thinks that she would marry him. Now, Eurymachus is afraid of being mocked by the lesser people. So we see that there are kind of nobility here, the suitors are nobility, and that there are sort of common folk. And the common folk are going to be less respectful of the upper class if they see that they're allowing somebody who's just a beggar to engage in the possibility of being a suitor to the queen. So that those class structures are there. They're there 600 plus years before current era. They're there well before, it's in the text, well before someone like Marx will come along and come up with this terminology of the proletariat, the aristocracy, right, and the bourgeoisie. Now, later critics, and I'm not going to go too far into it in this particular contextualized reading, but we will come back after I've finished the contextualized readings. Critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, in their dialectic of enlightenment, will claim that Odysseus is like the first bourgeois person, and that what we can see in the Odyssey already are the seedlings, or the seed formations of this thing that we will later call in human society the bourgeoisie, or the bourgeois class. And that we can see also, according to their critique, in Homer's Odyssey, we can see totalitarianism in its early form, that we can see the manifestation that will become totalitarianism in the 20th century in its perhaps nascent form. And this will be part of that tension that I've been trying to address throughout the course between those offenders of Western civilization who code. Now, this is not to say that all defenders of Western civilization do this, but there are definitely some on the far right that code in their putting on the pedestal of this idea of Western civilization. They are coding their devotion to white supremacy. So Western civilization is like defending it as a way that current white supremacists have tried to make broader, less racist sounding language so that they can infiltrate their ideas, that they can spread their ideas to a populace who won't, obviously doesn't want to hear anything about a blanket claims to racism, but or overt, I guess, claims to racism. Or to white supremacy. So it's a way for those ideas being pushed by white supremacists to become pervasive in culture without seeming to be on the surface racist. So this is not to say that all conservatives are racist, that all conservatives are far right wingers, but there's a large presence of that in current culture. And what they are doing, the reason why that particular faction of people, I think, are coming out is because critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer have said these sorts of things about the Odyssey. And they also happen to be left-leaning Marxian thinkers in their own time. They're, of course, dead now. And they were Jewish. So there's coded within the white supremacy not only a rejection of critical theory outright, but a rejection of critical theorists because they are left-wing and because they are Jewish, right? So that's coded. The kind of fascism of the Nazi era maintains its presence within the current far right's claims to the defense of Western civilization because of this discourse of critical theory. Okay, I'll say more about that in other lectures, but back to this contextualized reading here. The class relationships are there. After Penelope has stepped in here, Telemachus steps in, and he says, "Mother, my father's bow, no Achaean on earth has more right than I to give it or withhold it as I please. Of all the lords in Ithaca's rocky heights or the islands facing Elis, grazed by horses, not a single one will force or thwart my will, even if I decide to give our guest this bow, a gift outright, to carry off himself. So, mother, go back to your quarters, tend to your own tasks, the distaff and the loom, and keep the women working hard as well. As for the bow now, men will see to that, but I most of all. I hold the reins in this house." So he comes in, he steps in, and he's this forceful Telemachus again. We've seen this throughout the text. Sometimes he's emboldened by Athena, but Telemachus is saying, I'm the man of the house, and it will be my decision who gets to try to string this bow or not. you are a woman, go to your room. And Penelope is just sort of astonished by this, as the text says, and she listens to him and she withdraws to her room. But it says that she took to heart the clear good sense of what her son had. Now, of course, we know that Telemachus is play acting here as well, right? That he knows that he needs to get rid of his mom so that he and his father can do the bloody work that they intend to do. And so she goes to her room, and then Telemachus says to Eumaeus, go and get the bow and bring it here. And Eumaeus does so, and on his way, he's being taunted by the suitors. You grubby swineherd, are you crazy? The speedy dogs you reared will eat your corpse. Out there with your pigs, out there in the cold alone. If only Apollo and all the gods shine down on us. And so there's this invocation of Apollo right now. There's no appearance. There's no appearance in physical form, direct form, and dialogue that Apollo takes in this text. And I think that is very, very interesting here at the end, because Athena is coming and going as she pleases, right? As well as other gods like Hermes. Telemachus says, don't listen to them, Eumaeus. He urges him on. Carry on with the bow, old boy. If you serve too many masters, you'll soon suffer. So he's still playing his role, and he rebukes Eumaeus, at least in play here. Look sharp, or I'll pelt you back to your farm with flying rocks, he says. And now on his way, bringing the bow, Eumaeus instructs Eurycleia, who we know is the old woman, right, who reared Odysseus when he was young and who still takes care of Penelope. She is kind of the counterpart, of course, in terms of the servants to Eumaeus. And he instructs Eurycleia to go get all of the women to go and bolt their doors and not to come out no matter what they hear, just as Odysseus has said. And she does so. And then we get Odysseus with the bow. Now he held the bow in his hands, turning it over, tip to tip, testing it this way, that way, fearing worms had bored through the weapon's horn with the master gone abroad. A suitor would glance at his neighbor, jeering and taunting. Look at our connoisseur of bows. Sly old fox, maybe he's got bows like it stored in his house. That, or he's bent on making one himself. Look how he twists and turns it in his hands. The clever tramp means trouble. I wish him luck, some cocksure lord chimed in. As good as luck in bending back that weapon. And so this is all a display of what Aristotle will call in his text, the Poetics on Tragedy, hubris, right? That's what the suitors are displaying. In their mocking of the gods, their mocking of Xenia and hospitality, their excessive pride. There's a nice simile here that shows up. Odysseus is here, like an expert singer, skilled at a lyre and song, who strains a string to a new peg with ease, making the pliant sheep gut fast at either end. So with his virtuoso ease, Odysseus strung his mighty bow. Quickly his right hand plucked the string to test its pitch, and under his touch it sang out clear and sharp as a swallow's cry. Horror swept through the suitors' faces blanching white, and Zeus cracked the sky with a bolt, his blazing sign, and the great man who had borne so much rejoiced at last, that the son of cunning, Kronos, flung that omen down for him. Nice moment of synthesis of all sorts of imagery going on here, but especially the imagery of the storyteller, of the singer or the bard, which we know that Odysseus has been among the Phaeacians, that Odysseus continues to be in his disguises, in the ways that he lies to the people and tests the people that he has met. And of course, the suitors are sort of dumbstruck here, and he quickly says to his son, to Telemachus, your guest sitting here in your house has not disgraced you. No missing the mark. Look, no long labor spent. So again, that language of missing the mark, right? We already saw this as a theme showing up with Penelope and hitting the mark when she is going into the chamber to get the bow, and then the missing the mark here as well. And then that is being sort of contrasted with the hubris here, the excessive pride of the suitors. My strength not broken yet, not quite so frail as the mocking suitors thought, but the hour has come to serve our masters right. Supper in broad daylight, then to other revels, song and dancing, all that crowns a feast. He paused with a warning nod, and at that sign Prince Telemachus, and son of Odysseus, girding his sharp sword on, clamping hand to spear, took his stand by a chair that flanked his father, his bronze spear point glinting now like fire. And that'll take us to the end of book 21. We'll catch up with you again in the contextualized reading for book 22, which will be the slaughter in the hall. Thanks for watching, listening. Thanks for your attention. If you're on a podcast as well. Please remember that this is a labor of love for me, and that if you could support us on Patreon, that would be very helpful if you're getting something out of these contextualized readings. If you're not able to, no worries. But it's a small price to pay for about the price of a cup of coffee a month. You can help support us. Otherwise, you can find links to that below in the notes for YouTube, or you can go directly to find the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory online or on Patreon. But wherever and whenever you are, I hope that you have a good rest of your day, your morning, your night. Thanks again for your attention.